Hello there and welcome back to another video here on Wristwatch Revival. My name is Marshall. Thank you so much for coming along. This time on the bench, we've got really a watch that's right in my wheelhouse, the exact type of stuff I love to do on this channel. This is a Universal Genève watch from probably the late 50s based on the styling and some of the other little clues that we'll get. And it is in rough shape, as you can see. The case is plated. And as you can see, the plating has worn off and it's produced pitting, and you can actually see the brass right there. That's the brass that the actual case is made of underneath. That's not what you want to see. So that is going to need to be addressed for sure. The crystal doesn't look very good either. And let's see if it runs. You see the seconds hand going there? That means that we do have a runner. So that's good. Probably in desperate need of a service. Let's throw it on the time grapher and see how it's running. This is a machine that we can use to tell us the health of the watch. The most important thing is the rate on the left. Ooh, minute and a half. Okay, 80 seconds fast per day is not where you want a watch like this to be. Amplitude is next. That shows us kind of how much power is getting through the watch from the spring. And that's actually very low. 130 degrees is way low. We would prefer that to be for a watch of this age up in the 250, 270 maybe range, like, you know, optimally. So this thing is really needing a service, but it runs, so that's good. We'll start by taking off the watch band. It has a really weird little lug setup where the lugs have two kind of pins that face in, and that means that the spring bars in between are kind of unique. They actually have a hole, like a hollow opening. Take a look at this. Do you see that divot there? That is on all of these types of snap-on case back movements, and it's for your case opening knife to go. Let's take a look at the movement. Ooh, it's pretty. Well, they definitely knew how to make nice movements back then. This is a Universal Genève 262 movement. They made it. Oh, but we're missing a case screw, so that should have the same type of screw there. Now, that's not the type of screw that holds anything mechanically for the watch into place. It holds the movement to the case itself, but still we'll want to try to address that as well. Take a look at the crystal, and it looks pretty much toast as well. Oh yeah, that bezel, big pitting on the sides of it. And this watch has a lot of little gremlins. There's a lot going on with this thing, but it runs, so that can take a lot of the potential issues off the table. Looks like the handset okay as well, but yeah, the case has horrible pitting all over it. The crown is completely worn away. It's down to the brass. I'm going to use my hand levers to take off the hands here. If you've ever wondered about plating and how it works, basically what it allows the manufacturer to do is to take a cheaper base metal, like this one's brass, and then they can plate on top of it a layer of like nickel, which it looks like this one is, or even gold, which is better looking and also more resistant to color change and corrosion and rust and all of that kind of stuff. The downside to it is that it wears off. Now, this watch is quite old, but even then, that plating is toast. You'll see later watches really moved over to using stainless steel because of its resistance to corrosion. All right, I can press down this little button here to remove the winding crown and stem. This one's spring-loaded rather than screwed down. And we can continue with the disassembly. I'm going to take out the one case screw. Again, all it's doing is holding the movement to the case. But so that wasn't really going to go anywhere, but we'll try to remedy that as well. I gotta get the movement out of here. It should just pop out. There we go. And there's the case. Yikes. This thing does not look great. We're going to have to do some work on that case in a little bit. Normally, I try to have a pretty light touch, but when there's extreme pitting and the case is just straight up worn away, I'm a little more likely to try to do a full restoration. There's the dial. I have a special dial holder here that just keeps it safe. Nothing special. It's just a little box that was made just for that. You can take out the hour wheel. Now, this tool here is a Canon Pinion removal tool, And I recommend getting one of these if you're going to work on a lot of watches. Watch what happens when I push the lever. Little tiny teeth come in from the sides. And what that allows it to do is grab the Canon pinion securely and then remove it in one motion. If you don't have one of these, you have to use tweezers to do it. And that works okay, but you run the risk of the tweezers turning while you're taking it off and potentially bending the wheel that's attached to, which is the center wheel. As I always do, I'm going to take off the balance first. The balance actually has probably the two most delicate parts on the whole watch. in this, they call this the balance complete. And it's the hairspring, the balance spring, or the hairspring as it's known. Very, very delicate. And then the other is the balance staff. That's like the axle for that part. And both of those are very delicate. So getting it out of the way so that I can work on the watch and not feel like, if I slip one little bit or whatever, that I could permanently damage the watch is good. I do this as a hobby. Now I'm passionate about it. I take it seriously and I try my best to be the best watchmaker that I can. But ultimately, I still make mistakes. I'm still learning, and I want to reduce the chance of a disaster as much as I can. We'll start off by taking off the train wheel bridge. You can see it kind of looks like it's two parts, but it's actually not. It's a neat little design cue there, as that's actually just one big bridge with 3 jewels in it. The jewels, of course, are those red, deep red, kind of unique color parts you see on the movement. I can now take out the train of wheels. The escape wheel comes out. This is the 4th wheel, but it's kind of stuck. Yeah, the 3rd wheel doesn't want to come out either. Whenever I find myself in this situation, I just stop and I say, okay, just keep disassembling other stuff. Don't force it. I've really found that in watchmaking, anytime you feel the need to force something through, you shouldn't. The watches are made ultimately to be disassembled and serviced, especially ones from this era. So if you have to try to work one little part through a really tight opening or past or over another part, you are probably pushing your luck. And it probably will come out easier if you just show some patience. So that's what I'm going to do here. One thing that watchmaking is very good for is testing your patience. It is, I've seen people comment on the videos and say, I don't think I could do this because I wouldn't have the patience. And normally I would try to be encouraging to somebody and say, you might never know, but I will tell you, if you aren't willing to be patient, you don't have to be naturally patient. I don't think I am. But if you aren't willing to try to be patient, then yes, you are going to get very frustrated doing this hobby. But if you're willing to say, you know what, I got time, right? This isn't for a client. I can take my time. If it takes me all day to take this part apart, then I'll do it that way. Then you'll be okay. All right, so let's get this barrel bridge off of here. And that should expose the rest of the train of wheels so that we can take those out as well. Oop. So you see how one of the wheels stuck in the bridge? That's actually really common, particularly on old watches that haven't been worn or serviced in a long time. The oil will dry up and it'll just stick in there, especially if the watch hasn't been running. You can take the barrel out, and we're a good chunk of the way through the disassembly. This is that spring that I pushed down on to release the crown and the winding stem earlier. This is that little arm there is what provides the tension. And with that out, we should be able to just remove the rest of the keyless works as well as the winding stem like this, because that's actually what holds it in place. Here's the clutch wheel and the sliding clutch, so those will just come out freely now. And the setting lever should actually just fall to the bench too, but it doesn't want to. Where did it? Oh, I see. It just got stuck on the movement holder. So no issue there. Now we can move to the pallet fork. We're almost done taking this thing apart. These old movements are really quite straightforward, at least in comparison with with watch movements, as they are a little complicated, as you can see all the parts sitting on my bench already. But, no calendar on this, not even a mechanism to make it a center seconds hand. It's out on the side. So, ooh, there's some evidence. So you do see that right there? That's good evidence that this watch hasn't been serviced in a long time. There's a piece of plating or maybe some sheared off metal, something like that just sitting in there. That will come off during cleaning though. Okay, now we can flip the watch over and work on the keyless works. Kind of curious to see what this looks like underneath, because normally this plate has the setting lever spring attached to it. Oh, look at that spring underneath. That's cool. That one right there. That's a really elegant solution to this. You can see that the spring pushes up against the wall of the main plate on one side, and then on the other side, it will have tension as a result. Very, very simple. I like that. It's a little stubborn to come out. There it goes. Yeah, that's the yoke spring and the yoke in one part. That's really neat. Okay, before we put the watch in the watch cleaning machine, we want to put this this balance back on. And the reason we do that is actually the same reason that we took it off. It's to keep it secure. If we put the balance in the watch cleaning machine without attaching it, it would get tossed around in the baskets of it and it could get damaged. Oof. Yeah, this watch hasn't been serviced in a long time. No doubt about it. It certainly has been serviced before. You can tell there's all types of marks on the movement. Whoop. Barrel arbor jumped away from me a little bit, but there it is. But yeah, there's a good amount of dirt and grease in the mainspring barrel here. We'll go ahead and remove the mainspring now. You have to kind of walk it out with two hands like this. If you let go, it'll go flying. It can even fly in your face and hurt you. So you just want to be patient and kind of walk it out. But as you can see, my finger cots are getting pretty dirty just by holding this spring. Okay, everything needs to go into these little baskets. These are mesh baskets that make sure that the tiny screws and wheels don't get lost while it goes through the cleaning process. Then we put them in this bigger basket that will actually be put into the machine itself. Okay, so that's all ready to go in the watch cleaning machine. But let's take a look at this case once again before we do. This is what you don't want to see. I mentioned it before, but that's the actual base level brass underneath the plating, and it has been pitted and worn through. Let's take a look, by the way, at the... Oh. Okay, well, these are really interesting spring bars. They have hollow ends so that they can fit on those special lugs. But this isn't very special or... Ooh. God, what... Green slime? Really? I hope that that was at some point some type of grease that was applied. I don't know, though. I'm just going to wipe it off with a tissue here, and I'll actually end up throwing those into the Ultrasonic Cleaner as well, because they got pretty grimy. Okay, now let's put everything into the watch cleaning machine. This is a 3-step process that is cleaning, rinsing, and then I guess the 4th step is drying, and that'll clean the movement completely. While we're doing this, I did want to say thank you to all of my patrons. I've got a Patreon for this channel. If you like what I'm doing and like to support it, it's patreon.com/wristwatchrevival, and you get some cool perks for joining. If you join up, you get a thank you card and a sticker from the channel in the mail no matter what level you join, and you can get some cool early looks at some of my content, some of the rough cuts and stuff if you do sign up. Thanks for everybody who does that. Take a look at the movement here, all clean and beautiful, lined up. That's it. That's every part of the thing. I'm curious, when you see that, do you think, God, that's a lot of parts? Or do you think, oh, not that bad? I don't know. It kind of depends on where you're at on your watchmaking journey, I think. Okay, so here's this case once again. Not looking good, and it's going to require some serious attention, because you know what? I want to get this thing looking good again. I want somebody to be able to wear this watch and be proud of it and not have, make it look like it's came out of a junkyard. So first stop is going to be the ultrasonic cleaner. This sends literally ultrasonic waves through whatever liquid's in it that can help clean any debris or oils or anything off of the surface of the case, so that we can then start to address it. So in it goes. It just has a degreaser / detergent in it. And then once it's done, ta-da, we can take it out. And yes, I did put those spring bars in as well. In fact, there's one of them right here. I don't have other spring bars like that, so I just wanted to make sure that they got cleaned up so I could use them again. Okay, and there's the case back, the bezel, and now the actual case itself coming out. So now we got work to do. First things first is we need to strip the nickel that's on the outside, the plating, off. And the best way that I found to do this is a nickel stripping solution. That's the yellow stuff in my little experiment lab here that I've got. This plate that I'm putting it on heats up the fluid and also provides a stirring element via magnetic stir at the bottom. And this is the result. Nothing. It really didn't work. And I am starting to think that this is not nickel plating, that maybe it's chrome plated, which is a totally different process. I'm not sure, but that nickel stripper in all my tests worked very, very well, and it did nothing here. So that means that we have to do it the good old fashioned way. We got to get some sanding sticks out and put in some manual labor here to try to take off this outside layer and get it stripped down more to the base metal so that we can replate it. Now, it's worth noting here that chrome plating is not something that you can do at home. You can see the difference here between what it looks like after I've sanded it down and what it looks like before. But I kind of ran into an issue here. The case tube was in my way. And that has two issues. One, I need to sand that part, and it's just better if it's out of the way. But two, I also want to replate this case. That's right. We're going to be replating this thing on the channel here today. And I don't want to secure that in place by plating. That needs to be out when we do the plating. So I'm going to use my case tube removal tool here to take out the case tube, and I can just set it aside and then go back to work with the sanding stick. So what I was saying before though about chrome plating, you can't do it at home. It requires multiple poisonous chemicals and some temperatures and stuff that you can't really hit. So that's not how it works. You don't get to chrome plate at home, but I can nickel plate, and that's going to be my plan here. I plan on nickel plating this instead of chrome. So I need to get as much of this chrome plate off as I can, because one thing that you have to know about plating is that it has to look exactly how you want it to look before you plate it. It's not like paint. It won't fill in any cracks. It'll show all of the cracks and the seams and the dirt in it, even if you have a fingerprint on it. And what that means is I need to polish this thing. So I'm going to get out my Dremel. This is what I use to polish watch cases. And I'm going to polish the case so that it looks how I want it to look before I put it in the nickel plating process. It's kind of counterintuitive. You know, you would think that nickel plating would kind of fill in any little, gaps or crevices and stuff, and it doesn't. So here's what the case looks like right now. As you can see, it actually polished up, not quite to a brass color, but there is brass underneath, and you'll see it'll come, you'll be able to see it through after we do this next step. So plating is a relatively complex process. It took me a long time to get right, a lot of trial and error, but I like my process now. And the first step that I do is an Electro Cleaner. So this is a special solution that you put in, and then you do the same thing that you do when you electroplate, which we'll do next, but you do it in reverse. And so you put an anode, that's what that is. This one's a stainless steel anode. And then you submerge the parts into it, again, hung from a metal hook like I have here. And then you run the electricity through in reverse. And basically what happens is that in the correct solution, it will super clean the surface of the material of any contaminants that are left using electricity, as its guide. So we put the positive here on the anode, and then the negative is going to go here, and watch what happens. You see all those bubbles coming off? Now those are being whisked away by the stirring motion, but those are coming off of the actual workpiece here. So this is running quite a bit of electricity. This is about 10 volts, which isn't that much in general, but it's quite a bit for this type of process. And you can see it's actually clouded up the electro cleaning solution because so much contaminants has come off of it. And when you take a look, do you see how it's changed color a little bit? Now that brass is shining through a little bit, particularly on the main part of the case. Now this is distilled water that we need to rinse the piece off. Anytime you're doing plating like this, you need to rinse off between each time. Each step, you have to rinse off in a new, fresh distilled water. So now we can put on the nickel plating solution. Now, this isn't scientifically accurate, but the way to think of this is a liquid that has had nickel dissolved in it. Now we're going to turn down the voltage quite a bit. In fact, I had to get a different power supply here because the one I started with wouldn't go low enough. For doing such small parts, you actually need a relatively low amount of current compared to something bigger that people would traditionally nickel plate, like things for an engine in a car, for example, bolts or big chunks like that. So now what we do is we put a nickel anode in. So this is an actual piece of nickel. It's wrapped in some cloth it makes the plating a little bit cleaner. And then once again, we'll submerge the parts carefully in here, and then we'll apply the electricity once again. And a way to think about what's happening here is there's ions that will jump from one part of this metal to the other, and in between there's this nickel in the solution, and it'll kind of stick on. Now, you can see a little bit of what's going on in there, but I'm using low enough voltage so that there's actually very few bubbles that will form on the surface of it. Those bubbles aren't actually desirable. They can create pitting or uneven surface. So if you get it just right, there actually aren't bubbles, but you will be electroplating nickel onto it. And I'll turn it over once just to make sure that both sides get equal exposure to the nickel anode. And then we'll let it run again. Total time in the bath here will be somewhere around 15 minutes, maybe 20, depending on, how much nickel plating we need. And once again, I'm going to give it a quick rinse, and you can see it went from that brass color to now shiny nickel. Let's take a look at what we came up with here, and boom, look at that. Way better. So not only is the pitting gone, but on top of that, it's got this nice bright nickel. Now you can see it's not perfect, right, under extreme magnification, but it is so much better than before. And we have now replated and restored the case. So we can set it aside and get back to business on the movement. Now that the movement's out of the watch cleaning machine, we can once again take off the balance. This actually serves two purposes now. The first one is the same thing as before, the safety of it. But the second one is it actually has to be out of the way so that we can put some of the parts that sit underneath it in. Some of the wheels, the escape wheel does, the pallet and the pallet bridge all go in there. Okay, so we'll start by reassembling the barrel. That means the mainspring, which I just ran a thin layer of grease using my finger cots over the length of the spring. That gives it a little bit of corrosion resistance. You really don't need to over oil a spring like that. And now I'm going to take my mainspring winder set. This is when you pick yourself up a set of mainspring winders, you're in. This was the crossing line for me on, okay, am I going with this hobby or not? I've bought some tools, I'm not in for too much, and I could still change my mind if it didn't really click with me. But when I said, okay, yes, I will order these mainspring winders, I knew there was no looking back because they're such a specific tool and they're also quite expensive. Okay, so that will wind the mainspring into the end of this tube, and then that allows us to put the mainspring back in flat and concentric. And as a little reward, we get one of the best sounds in watchmaking. That one. It's so good. And check it out. The spring is nice and flat in there, and it's all ready to go to receive the lid as well as the barrel arbor here as well. And so this also allows you to reuse mainsprings a little more liberally than you would. You don't have to. Like, you can try to order a new mainspring for every movement you work on. I prefer to use the original mainspring if it's still functional. I like keeping original parts on these. I mean, I view these watches as little pieces of history. And so if I can keep an original part, I will. That said, if the original part is broken or non-functional, I'll replace it. I'd rather have a little piece of history that works than one that is all original but broken. Okay, now the lid can go on. And I've got this handy little tool that helps you press that lid back on. It just puts pressure around the circumference of the lid so that it can snap into place just like that. Okay, so barrel complete, put together, and it can even go right back into movement like so. Oh, it's so nice when everything's cleaned up, you know, like, oh, look how pretty it is. All the parts are sparkly, not a speck of dirt on them, at least theoretically. Start off with the escape wheel, finally get it to sit in its pivot. Next is the fourth wheel. Now these have what they call an extended pivot. And that means that one of the pivots is extra long. And that's because it actually goes through to the other side of the movement. Why? That's actually what the seconds hand runs off of. That fourth wheel, the one I put in right before this one, that spins at a rate of, you guessed it, 1 time per minute. And that means if you stick a hand on it, every time it rotates fully, it will have been a minute. You can delineate that into seconds, and you've got yourself a seconds hand. It's a genius way, honestly. When I put the seconds hand on this watch, I'm literally sticking it onto that pivot. Like it's attached to that wheel. It's not on anything else. It's really smart design. Okay, now we can put the barrel bridge on. Most watches were made like that. Pocket watches, almost all of them, and then going up through this era, most watches were made where the seconds hand was off center. It became much more fashionable, probably not long after this watch came out, to do a center seconds hand. All right, now this is always tricky. We have to line up those 3 jewel holes with the 3 pivots, and we don't want to push down until they're all lined up. And you can see the wheels don't turn freely. That means that they're not lined up yet. So let's see if we can get them lined up. Not quite. There. Did you see that bridge go down? Now look. Boom. Now they spin freely. And that is what we were looking for. Slight pressure with that stick or a pair of tweezers just to keep a little bit of tension on. And then once it clicks into place, now you can screw it down. You always want to be careful and test the free running of those wheels as you go. Now, before we put the rest of this back on, I'm going to use some oil here. This is medium viscosity oil that's going to go on the top of the barrel bridge. That barrel bridge interacts with the top of the barrel there. It's metal on metal. Now, it moves very, very slowly. So generally speaking, it doesn't need a ton, but you do want to put some form of lubrication so that it can stand the test of time. If you look at these old watches, that's actually one of the parts that's worn most often. Okay, crown wheel can go on now. Interesting design choice. Almost all of the crown wheels have a reverse threaded screw. Did you know that you could make a screw that when you turn it to the left, it tightens it down? It's weird because they just don't do that, but it works perfectly fine. The reason that it's like that, by the way, is that way, when the wheel spins, if it were to catch that screw, it would actually be tightening it down rather than loosening it. Careful, there we go. So that's the click spring going in and now the click. A little bit of a tricky setup here. So I have to line up the click, but then get the click spring underneath it because it actually pushes on the other edge of it. So what I'm going to do is take the click spring screw, the click screw, and I'm going to kind of give it a 3/4 of the way down type scenario. And now I'm going to move the click spring out of the way using this black stick and then lift the click over it so that it just sort of barely hangs on. And then I'll hold that down. And then with my other hand, I'll finish screwing down the click screw. And that way, that little click spring actually provides tension like this. See that? If it's on the other side, of course, it's not doing its job. Now I can put the ratchet wheel back on. Ratchet wheel has a square hole in the middle, and that has to line up with the top of the barrel arbor. That arbor that we put in actually has a square hole on the top as well. And that way, When one turns, the other turns as well. They're locked in position. And we can screw them together thusly. All right. Good, and you can see the train wheel still moving very freely. So that's nice. Now we can flip the watch over and start to put the keyless works back together. This is the clutch wheel and the sliding clutch. These two parts interface with each other, and they're designed such that they can spin against each other one way, but not the other way. And that way, when you wind your watch up, you can spin the crown one direction, but when you let go, it doesn't unwind again. Okay, those are in place. The keyless works coming together. That's just an intermediate wheel that sends the turning motion of your fingers when you're setting the hands up to those other wheels. There's the Canon pinion going on. That's the one I mentioned before that you'd like to have the special tool to remove. And here's the setting lever. We can put a little bit of grease on it. It's a high friction part. It also helps it just hold in place while we put everything back together. And it goes right here. Like that. And now we can put on this spring that holds it in place. And it goes, wait a minute. Oh no. Yeah. It goes on the other side. And I forgot to put it in. Or I thought it went on this side or something. So it looks like it goes under the barrel bridge. Now, I talked earlier about having patience with stuff like this and just moving the stuff out of the way that needs to be moved out of the way. And I got to walk the walk. If I'm going to talk like that on here, I gotta do it too. So that means that I need to take this apart. Here's some good news though. I need to take off the ratchet wheel here, but the click spring, and the click screw can stay in place. Same thing with the ratchet wheel, the crown wheel and all of its parts. So this actually isn't that big of a deal to reverse. Yeah, it's a little frustrating to have to go back, but you know what? I've already got it apart. So there's the part that I need to have held in tension, and now I can replace this little tension spring. A little bit finicky, tiny little screw. So let's see if I can gently, there we go. Okay, so that actually wasn't too bad. Sometimes those ones don't want to let the screw sit flush, so you'll have to kind of hold it down with something, but it looks like no problem here. And we're back on the road again. So once again, the barrel bridge needs to go on. Then I need to put on the ratchet wheel and then screw it down. But then we're right back where we were before. See, it wasn't even that bad. Right? Wasn't that bad. That's what I'll tell myself anyway. Okay. So with that done, we can get back to business on the keyless works. Again, the keyless works, the whole function of them is twofold. It's to wind the watch and set the watch, and doing so through one crown is what the keyless works gives you. If you've ever wondered why they call it that, oh, and look at this, there's actually a jewel that needs to be oiled that would be underneath the minute wheel. So I'll just get that oiled real quick before putting the wheel on. You know, in the pocket watch days, they had keys. Like you had to have a little baby key that would go on your watch to wind it and to set it. And when they invented these, which they have on pocket watches as well, they said it's the keyless or the keyless works because everyone else had to use a key. Okay, so let's get this really cool yoke and yoke spring combination on. I think I just need to get it. Yeah, there we go. So just get it snugged in up against the setting lever, and then I can continue with the restoration here. This is a cover plate that kind of keeps everything in place. And now we can get some grease. Really important to put a little bit of grease on certain parts of the keyless works as they are high friction areas, and it really does help you use them a lot better. We can replace the winding crown and stem as well. And now I'll go ahead and put a little bit of grease here where the setting lever and the yoke interact. And let's make sure it's working. There we go. And there we go. So that's what we want to see. A little bit too much grease on the top. So I'll just use some Rodico to clean that up. And now we can put in the pallet fork. This is where things get interesting, because once we put this in with the pallet fork bridge, then we can put the balance in and we can see how this thing wants to run. Or sometimes if this thing wants to run. There's always a real tension when it comes to getting the balance in. It has a moment of truth feeling to it, even more so if the watch wasn't running and you're hoping it will. But even on a watch like this, you can't help but feel that excitement. It's really one of the best parts about this hobby. Okay, pallet fork secured. And now we can put a little bit of wind in the watch. That'll create some tension down the gear train, and it'll end at the pallet fork. It should snap back and forth under a little, there we go, under a little tiny bit of pressure. That looks perfect. So everything's looking good so far. Now we can go for the balance. And see if this thing wants to run. Little bit of song and dance here, always to get the pivots lined up on the balance, but also have the pallet fork lined up with the impulse jewel. You can see it kind of dances around. Let's see if we can, oh, that looked good. No, the bridge isn't quite down. Gentle. If you push down and it's out of place, you are in big trouble. Okay, it definitely wants to run. There we go. And there we go. We have a running movement. Beautiful. So it kicked right up again. And it always brings a smile to my face. Like I said, this thing ran before, and all I did is clean it and put it back together, and it still feels really good to see it jump back to life. And let's see how good it feels, because first we get to oil the jewels on this thing. Oiling jewels, generally speaking, is an exercise in restraint. It's interesting, if you put too much oil in, it'll actually run down the axle, if you will. It's called a pivot, but an axle is probably a more commonly used word for this, and it'll drain out of protecting where it's actually supposed to be. What you're trying to do is use just enough oil so that it suspends itself in that pivot. That's on the bottom of the barrel, by the way. So that's just making sure that both top and the bottom get some of that medium viscosity. Okay, everything's oiled up and clean. Let's see how it does on the time. Wow. 294 degrees of amplitude is plenty, and it's running at 1 or 2 seconds a day. So this thing is in great shape. It really just needed a service and a regulation, and off it went. Now we can put our focus back on getting the rest of the watch together. So first we'll replace the case tube in our beautifully refinished case now that it's been replated and shined up. You can get a good look at how it came out there as well. It came out lovely. Nickel's a really nice color to it. It has a almost a warm undertone to it. It's not quite as cold as a silver color as like pure silver or something like that, or even stainless steel. Okay, and now we can get the crystal in place. So there's the bezel, and there's our new crystal. Almost always just replace the crystal. They're cheap. They're only a few bucks, and it makes all the difference. The crystal is responsible for you to be able to see the dial, and the dial is arguably the most important part of a vintage watch. It's like that or the movement, but the dial you get to look at all the time. So now I'm going to use my crystal press to kind of bend down that crystal, and then I'll bring up the bezel and try to fit it around so that the crystal is snugly fit inside. It looks like I need to go down a little further, just another, half turn. And let's see if it'll fit now. There, just like that. So now it's snug and I can undo the tension on the top. And then the crystal, being acrylic, will actually just expand into the slot and it'll hold itself in actually pretty tight. See, I can actually push on it and it'll stay in there. I could probably get it out if I really pushed, but it can take some pressure. Okay, and I mentioned this before. Look how badly this is worn. That is supposed to be all shiny, but it has been used so much that the plating's completely gone. So we're going to replace that as well. This watch would look ridiculous with a brand new, freshly plated case and then a worn brass crown. So we're just going to have to pick out a new one. People don't really replate crowns. They often get worn, particularly once the plating's gone. Then it's brass, and brass is a fairly soft material. So if you're winding it every single day and it's made of brass, it'll actually wear down quite quickly. But I've got a nice matching crown here. It looks pretty, right? And that should work just fine. Now we have another issue here, and I know that a lot of you wonder, well, where do I get parts and stuff? And a lot of it's from eBay for the movement or buying a donor movement and taking the parts off. But I do have some assortments like this. These ones are just assorted screws. These aren't a special brand. These aren't for Universal Genève or any other company. They're kind of generic screws. And like in this case, the third vial are case screws. So like I'll just grab one and try to find one that looks like it lines up correctly. Like that. That looks pretty good. It looks maybe slightly bigger on the top, but the thread looked right. So there you go. That's where sometimes you have to find your parts. You know, you do what you got to do with these really old movements. Okay, I can put the hour wheel on. Make sure that it's engaged with the minute wheel, like so. Now we can grab the dial and really just get everything else together on this. The dial, the new crown, get the hands on there, put it in the refurbished case, and we'll have a finished product. We'll start with the hands. These hands are beautiful. I considered doing a little bit of restoration work on them, but I decided to leave them. I think they look really good how they are, and they match the numbers on the dial, both in terms of color but also wear. And I think that if I polished up the hands and they look super shiny, it would clash with the numbers. And again, as I said, you know, I like some patina. I like to keep things original, so I'm not gonna restore these hands. I am gonna reinstall them, however. There we go. Okay, and this is the second hand going on. And again, that little bump that I'm putting this on is the other side of the fourth wheel pivot. It's pretty cool. Okay, so that puts that into place, and then a quick test to make sure that that I can still set it and that the hands don't run into each other. And now we can complete the process here by moving on towards actually casing the movement. And our new crown with its stem will go in as well. I'm actually just going to take the bezel with the new crystal. I'm not going to put it into place just yet because I still need to kind of screw things down, but I'm just going to use it so that I can put the dial face down with the hands on and not have them, you know, get all mangled up. So here's our new case screws, or one of them's new. The other one's old. Can't even tell the difference though, can you? And then we can put on the case back. Oh, do you see what I see? Look at that. It says nickel chrome on it. I did not see that at the beginning. So this was actually chrome plated. So that's why my nickel stripper wouldn't work. I wish I would have seen that earlier just to save myself the time, but I am glad to have solved that mystery. I didn't actually realize that they would put on the case back if it was chrome or nickel plated. So yeah, you learn something new every day. And look at what we came out with here. Now that it's been fully assembled, it is absolutely lovely. I can take a new watch strap as well, and reusing those kind of crazy hollowed out spring bars, I can put a brand new watch strap on it as well. And look at the finished product. How beautiful is that? Again, the star of the show, secretly is the dial. It's got that beautiful orange yellow hue. It's just this golden, it's lovely. And you know, this is you don't see watches made like this. Like they have to go through the aging process over time to get that exact type of look. And I can tell the difference, you know, I can just tell the difference. So absolutely gorgeous. Take a look at what this looks like, by the way, before. Pitting, terrible. And now look at it after. How pretty is that? It's such a huge improvement. And to me, it's made this watch something that somebody can be proud to wear on maybe special occasions or even just as an everyday watch. That's going to do it for this video. I want to thank you so much for hanging out with me. I really do appreciate you taking the time to go on this journey with me. If you want to find me on Instagram, I'm wristwatch_revival. I'll post in between project updates or pictures from my watch collection and stuff. You can come say hi over there if you happen to partake. Otherwise, I just want to say thanks again for joining me, and we'll see you next time.